All righty. Good morning, everybody. I hope everyone's doing well. Well, down here it's quite cold, but it is beautiful nonetheless. I hope you're having a wonderful Tuesday morning, or whenever you watch this, a wonderful day. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. I've recently been not accepted, but I've been given some leeway, and some of the guys have started giving the okay and getting my name out there amongst the Marines and MARSOC men that fought in the GWAT. And this is one of our guests that we've been trying to get in touch with for a while, that just happened out of the blue, and we managed to get him, and it's going to be a wonderful interview. I posted yesterday. He's been on with Jack Murphy already over at the Team House, a wonderful interview that I'll link in the show notes, and he's also done another recent interview that I'll post in the show notes. But today we're going to be learning a lot of military history, specifically Marine Corps, but we're going to be talking a little bit about Army Special Forces and the Marines, and we're also going to be talking about the different flow of what an officer is doing, not only in the Marine Corps, but when he's in Force Recon, when he's in the reserves, when he goes to MARSOC, and he also happens to do a little staff work for the God of War known as JSOC. So we are completely honored today to have Mr. I should say Lieutenant Colonel Russell Worth Parker, and he spent about, if I'm not mistaken, about 26 years in the military, in the Marine Corps, about 22 or 23 of those years in active combat, and the last bit of those years were in staff positions, but still hardcore as hell. So before I keep babbling on too long, Mr. Russell, glad to have you. It's an absolute honor. I hope you're doing well this morning.
I am, thank you. I hope you are doing the same.
Can't complain here. Not that nobody'd listen anyways.
That's right.
Well, it's awesome because Mr. Russell, as we know, a Marine close to my heart. If I have to leave the room, I got the rescues out, so
No worries.
bear with me on that. If something gets haywire, you can just talk into the screen and go.
I've got fingers coming.
Hang on one second. Calm down. All right. Sorry about that. This is terrible start.
I got a Labrador who's going to go nuts when my painters show up. So,
all righty. But Mr. Russell grew up in Georgia. He grew up in Athens. I love Athens. Athens is a music, a history, a great college town, and just an all-around awesome spot. And we always like to ask our guests a little bit about their upbringing, family history, and we've got a very unique case of family history with Mr. Russell today that we're going to get into. So right off the bat, let's learn a little bit about your early days. When and where were you born?
All right, I was born October 30th of 72 in a hospital in Gainesville, Georgia. My family is epicentered on a little town between Athens and Gainesville called Winder. And so I consider that the ancestral home, but I mainly grew up in Athens. Spent a little bit of time in the mountains of Southwest Virginia when I was particularly young. My mom and I moved up there for 3 or 4 years, and then back down to North Georgia, and that's where I grew up till I went to college. When I was 17, I went to Colorado.
Wow, man! And I say it. I know the city boys do good, but there's something about the boys being out in the country, playing sports, hunting, fishing, and guys, I'll link his Instagram page because not only being a reader and a writer, he is a hunter, and his dog is very highly trained, and they do some fantastic hunts and some videos, and as well as some Marine Corps history he lays out every once in a while. And he has a book page that has some wonderful combat books that I think anybody that's looking to learn about all aspects of military history throughout the world and history is a great page to follow that I'll link in here. But you, from what I've understood, your family has not only military Marine history in their blood, but service to the nation in many other aspects, like lawyers, politicians, and such as that. Could you explain a little bit about your family history militarily for us?
Yeah. From a military perspective, I mean, you nailed it as far as if you go to the family reunion on my mother's side, it seems like everybody there is either a lawyer, judge, teacher, or preacher. And then the next line down is military. And so I was blessed, my grandfather died young, when he was about 40. But before, and he was a Georgia Court of Appeals judge at the time, but he dropped out of Emory University to go fight in World War II, and got hit at Sugarloaf Hill as a machine gunner with George Company. One of the George vets was very clear with me, it's George, not golf. George 229. And then he came home and had a law career, and then a judge, became a judge. His dad was a judge. His grandfather was a judge. His son was later a judge. It's just what a lot of folks in my family do. But, in that picture, to looking at it, to his left is my dad. My dad was a Marine in the early 70s. And then him, and then I became a Marine. And to the right is my cousin, who's currently serving. And then down below in black and white is my cousin Buddy. Buddy was West Point classmates with the other guy in black and white, who is my cousin by marriage, Joe Clemens. And if you read T.R. Fehrenbach's This Kind of War, the last chapter is about Pork Chop Hill, and it's about them. And so Joe got the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions there as a first lieutenant and company commander. And then in that photo, I believe, is when he was a brigade commander. He's in the Ranger Hall of Fame down at Fort Benning. Buddy got shot in the head in the Yadrang Valley when I believe he was a battalion operations officer at the time. They basically told him to go home and wait to die. So instead, he rehabbed and became a state congressman and county commissioner there in Atlanta, and went to law school and lived a full life, particularly for somebody that took a shot in the head. And then my cousin Bruce and his father Bruce are flanking Joe Clemens in that photo. And I will say about Joe, I was reading Norman, what's his name? Desert Storm and Norman Schwarzkopf. I was reading Schwarzkopf's biography, and he said, Joe was the finest combat leader he ever saw. And I read something else by Colin Powell where he talked about Joe Clemens. So he really was something else. But Bruce Jr. and Bruce Sr. Bruce served in the Navy, and was a really fine sailor, and his dad was a helicopter pilot, and they are both lawyers up in Northeast Georgia, and they both fly a whole bunch. So just to, service is just something you do.
I mean, not only the military service, but coming home, being a lawyer, involved in politics. I mean, that also the continuation. And then, I mean, for your, was it your uncle or great uncle you said that was earned the DSC?
That was Joe Clemens, and he's my cousin by marriage. It's real interesting. Those two were classmates at West Point, and Joe married Buddy's sister. And then they both, as I say, end up as Joe. Buddy relieved Joe on top of Pork Chop Hill after Joe's company had been shot down to, I think, 30% effective. You can watch the movie Pork Chop Hill with, who's in it? Rip Torn and Gregory Peck.
Mm-hmm. And great movie.
Gregory Peck's playing my cousin Joe. So growing up with those guys was really cool. But, they were such neat guys because they're totally unimpressed with themselves. They both died in the last 5 years.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, me too. I mean, it's kind of natural life cycle. But I took that book. I went to see them. I'd just gotten home, I think, from Afghanistan the first time. And I went to our family reunion. I carried that book to get them to autograph it. And of course, I grew up with that book. At least in my Marine Corps raising, everybody read that book, talked about that book, whatever. And and I handed it to them, and they're like, "Well, what's this?" And so this is the book. It's got this whole chapter about you guys. And it's kind of the book everybody talks about with Korea. They're like, never heard of it.
Wow. I mean, geez.
Totally
just totally, yeah, just nonchalant, non-caring whatsoever. Just doing their duty. I mean, God. So, I mean, it's really not hard to see how you would not follow in footsteps like this with your family. And like you said on Jack's, it wasn't like, this is career guys. I mean, they didn't make a career out of it, so to speak, but they were there long enough, did enough things to where, I mean, I can't help but think this is in y'all's blood. I mean, this is
service, period. Like raised in that. Well, and my dad's side of the family too. My grandfather on his side was a merchant marine guy during World War II.
Oh,
my dad was a Marine. And there's a whole lot more Marines and soldiers and sailors and air folk than I put in that picture in my immediate family when I go to that reunion. And I mean, not everybody was only Joe Clemens was Joe Clemens. Only Buddy Russell was Buddy Russell. Those guys were,
one of a kind.
Again, early Rangers and Ranger Hall of Fame and Silver Stars and DSCs and all that kind of stuff. Most of us just joined and, did our thing for anywhere between 4 and, in my case, 27 years and moved on. So it's not like, you're in the presence of these great heroes. You're in the presence of Americans who did what they're supposed to do and then went on to live good lives.
Yeah. I mean, so I gotta think. I mean, just total assumption making here. I mean, you being from the South in Athens, no less, I gotta think you're doing a little bit of being outdoors and some sports and such as that. Maybe baseball, football, or basketball. Were you, as a young age, were you thinking of? Because you're very, very intelligent. I know you'll say to the otherwise, but you're a reader like no other I've ever seen. I like to think I'm a voracious reader, but you make me look like a preschooler. Did you want to go? Were you thinking of military service early on, or did you want to go to college and be a professional?
Well, all of the above, but I figured I would follow kind of this path where, my dad did a little under 4 years. My grandfather did under 4 years. Of course, he got shot bad enough that was it. And it was the end of World War II anyway. But most folks dipped in, did their thing and got out. My great uncle was a senator for 39 years. And my great uncle was, he was also the governor of the state, but my uncle Ernie was the governor of the state as well. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go join the Marine Corps, follow my dad's footsteps. I mean, my dad was the inspiration for the Marine Corps, and then my grandfather, but my dad particularly. And then I'm going to get out and go to law school, and I'm going to practice law, and then probably run for Congress or one of these kind of things. And I didn't really connect the fact that, like, I'm just constitutionally speaking, not the guy for that. I don't. It's ironic as hell that I was a Marine for 27 years. I don't like being in a hierarchy. I don't like having a boss. I don't like being told what to do. I don't like having my time managed. I mean, you were talking about playing sports. I didn't play any sports.
Oh, wow.
I should have. I regret not. And in fact, when I started training for the Marine Corps hard, when I was, 16, I was running so much that the cross country coach was like, why don't you come out for the cross country team? And I just saw that as some way to control me. But what I did have was I had an English teacher whose son was in my grade and we were friends, and they got me into Boy Scouts. My scoutmaster was a Vietnam vet. He was a 25th Infantry Division first tour. Then he went back as an advisor to the Arvin Ranger battalions, did 6 months of that. And then when he came home, ended up in one of the reserve SF groups, either 11th or 12th, before they became 19th and 20th. And he retired out of that. So that guy was my scoutmaster, and he gave me a lot of books. He turned me on to a lot of names. And so, the same names that, when I was 12 and 13 and 14.
Alert books.
paying attention to those guys the way other kids were paying attention to baseball and football. I didn't care about Michael Jordan. I cared about Billy Wall. So
wow, yes.
And then it was really cool because, but my dad was a Marine, so I was going to go to the Marine Corps, which then vectored me into being interested in Force Recon and reading all of Bruce Norton's books and reading Alex Lee's Force Recon Diary, or third Force
Command.
Recon was. Yeah, Command, Force Recon Command. Any book that came out about Force Recon, good, bad, or indifferent, I would read.
Back there on the walls, back there, full of them. Green Ghost was another good one. If you don't have that one, that'd be right up your alley.
Green Ghost, and then since in the last 10 years, I got through Digger Odell, got connected with Colonel Andy Finlayson, so I've got his books on my shelf up here behind.
If you're not in with Andy, I'm very close with Andy. He's been on 4 or 5 times. If you ever need to connect with Andy, because I've been trying to get to the Force Recon reunion in Mobile or either Atlanta or Florida, and I keep trying to go. But if you need to link up with Andy, I can get you in with Andy.
I'm connected. I've talked to him a couple times, and he sent me his books. I'm looking at them right now, actually.
Fantastic books.
So yeah, they really are. He's a pretty exceptional cat, and I do a fair bit of when I talk about Marine Corps history, I talk about Andy Finlayson.
Absolutely, and as we were speaking, I think this will come up later. We won't bury the lead right off the bat, but you were around a lot of the men we hear about from our prior interviews that you come in contact: the Digger Dales, the Andy Finlaysons, the Doc Nortons, the Bill Peters, the Gunny, the Rick Ravenold, Bob Garcia. I mean, you're around Recon royalty, and then you guys begin becoming Recon royalty. I don't think y'all like to say that, but y'all are. I mean, whether you like it or not, y'all are. But so you're not playing any sports, and right off the bat, this is my life. So no college. You graduate. Do you graduate in Athens?
Yeah, I graduated Cedar Shoals High School, and then I did go to college from there.
Oh, okay.
I wanted to be my dad was a commissioned officer in the Marine Corps, and I wanted to be a commissioned officer in the Marine Corps. I don't know that I necessarily understood the why of that, other than my dad did. And I did want to lead. Like if you look at the little Army men you play with when you're a kid, and there's the one that's got the 45 and the binoculars. That was all in my mind. That was me when I was playing with my Green Army men. And so that was my thing. Years later, there were some, good and bad for that at various stages of my life, but that is the route I chose.
That's what happens. So did you join a ROTC program in college at Georgia, or where did you?
No, I went to the undergrad at the University of Colorado, which had a huge Marine contingent within, and they built it considerably larger after I left. They left.
How'd you get to Colorado though?
My mother wanted me to get out of Georgia for a few years and just see something else. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, we were dug in pretty tight in the state, and it's good to go somewhere nobody knows you, and you kind of got to figure it out for yourself.
Absolutely.
And so I went to Boulder, Colorado, thinking I'd be a rock climber and do ROTC. And
beautiful.
I was big into climbing again because of my scoutmaster. Ed Shellnut is his name. He still lives in Athens.
Wait, that name again?
Ed Shellnut.
Ed Shellnut.
Shellnutt.
Is this the gentleman that would take you to the early SOARs and SFAs in Atlanta?
Yeah, and the gun show.
Holy crap.
Point out, he'd be like, that guy over there was a, Team 10, and that guy over there was this.
Yeah. People don't realize that was before SOAR got made up in the 80s or whatever. So They all did the Atlanta thing. So you were meeting, and probably not knowing it until he pointed out, you were seeing Mike Force men, Force Recon men, SOG 10. I mean, that you really got.
And I say this as a guy who's aging, right? I'm 53. Like those guys were probably entering their 40s, maybe.
Oh yeah.
Right. So they were still fit and still, vital. And it's not to knock anybody who's getting old, because I'm doing it more every day. But it was just like meeting people kind of still in their prime, and you're like, wow, I remember I did Georgia History Day when I was in high school, and Ed helped me out because he was a collector as well as being a doer. And so he had a set of Larry Dring's utilities.
Oh,
And he let me do, I did this whole, Georgia History Day about the individual in history and Larry Dring and what an effective guy he was in a firefight. And it was a really, really good display. So I did well. Otherwise, I don't think from a historical perspective, they were really that interested in me or my fascination with Larry Dring.
that's all. I mean, and what a character, guys. If you don't know about that case, y'all should do that. Do some Googling after this show. Very, very, very interesting individual. And God, that's so cool of you. I mean, at a young age, already knowing names like this and covering it for school projects and other stuff like that. I mean, you definitely were drinking from the fire hose at an early age, history wise, getting what you were getting.
Yeah, and very specifically interested, frankly, in the things that you're very specifically interested in. It was in the 80s that and that was a different time. Obviously, there weren't as many books. There's certainly no podcasts. No. So as far as resources, you either knew an Ed Shellnut who could say, hey, kid, read this book. And the other thing I had, and I'm going to write an essay about this guy one day, Watkinsville, Georgia is a town right on the edge of Athens. And there was a used bookstore there called the Trade-A-Book. And the guy who owned it was a retired Marine infantry lieutenant colonel named Sandy McPherson. And he was the gentlest, kindest, quietest guy in the world. But, given his age, had served in Vietnam multiple times as an officer and as a Marine infantryman. And I really don't know, like Sandy was not forthcoming about his story, and I didn't badger him about it. He would point me over to the military book section and say, well, this one's good. And here, read this. And do you have this? And, having folk, if you're into something, whatever it is, wildlife, plant botany, I don't care. Having somebody older take an interest in you and your interests makes all the difference.
Absolutely. Just like in, as we're about to see in the military, having someone a little more knowledgeable take you under your wing can be the difference of you being a turd burglar or a upstanding citizen or a well-liked and well-operational Marine officer. So, yeah, I mean, absolutely. So with it getting closer to Marine Corps time here, do you go ahead and graduate and become commissioned out of Colorado?
Yeah, so I graduated May something of 1994, and I think the 13th maybe. And 5 days later, I was in Quantico, Virginia, getting ready to start the basic school. And so I did 6 months of the basic school, and then I was selected to be, and I use the term selected on purpose. There was a guy, General P.K. Van Riper.
Oh, yes. You've got a post about him that is amazing.
Yeah. So Van Riper, and if you read Malcolm Gladwell's Blank, a bunch of it is about Van Riper. So Van Riper came home from Desert Storm, I guess, really full of piss and vinegar and angry about the state of Marine Corps intelligence. And so in the Marine Corps, if you identify a problem, you're going to get challenged to have a solution. Otherwise you're just bitching. And so Van Riper said, hey, we got a problem with Marine Corps intelligence. The Marine Corps said, how are we going to fix it? Specifically leadership at the junior levels. And so he created 4 new military occupational specialties for young Marine officers. And I bit on the bait for one of them and became a ground intelligence officer. So I went from TBS to the Marine Infantry Officer course because they kind of picked guys they thought would be able to complete that as well as complete the Army's Intelligence Officer Basic course, which, sounds like it was some huge hurdle. It wasn't. Now, IOC is a phenomenal course. IOC is the best course in the Marine Corps, period, bar none. Rank.
Is that the infantry officers course?
Yeah, I can't. My godson started it at 11:59 on Easter night, the other evening, and it's It's harder now than it was when I went through, I think, by a damn sight. It was hard when I went through. It's always been purposefully hard, but rational and reasonable, and everything tied to a lesson and learning something. Like there's never just pain for pain's sake, but there's lots of pain. And it's just a fantastic education to prepare a young Marine officer to go from provisional rifle platoon commander, which is what the basic school prepares all Marine officers to be, regardless of what they're going to do as a real job, and then to make you into a qualified infantry officer ready to grab 42 young Marines and go to war. And so that was a phenomenal experience. And then I went out to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, and I was going to the Army Military Intelligence Officer Basic Course. They've since shut down that MOS altogether, but before they did that, they were vectoring them through the Navy Marine Corps Intelligence Training Center down at Dam Neck. But so you got hybridized, and then your first job was either to be at a scout sniper platoon, then called a surveillance targeting and acquisition platoon, or to go to a recon battalion. And young me thought he was going to do 3 years and get out, and a short circuit route to either one of those jobs sounded super cool. And I had never thought much beyond about the next year at any point in my life. So off I went, and I went to Hawaii in 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines, and was in their scout sniper platoon.
Wow. Okay. And was it true when you did get commissioned, were you not only the youngest lieutenant in the Marine Corps at this time, and maybe the youngest overall Marine in the Marine Pacific Command, or
It was the latter at one point. I think I don't know is the real answer, but I think it is safely assumable that when I got commissioned, because I started elementary school a year early, and I was always a year behind all my peers. I am willing to bet that when I got commissioned in the Marine Corps at 21 years of age, that I was probably the youngest second lieutenant on active duty. I know when I went to Hawaii, I was the youngest Marine officer at the Marine Forces Pacific Officers Ball, because I had to stand up and do what you do every year at the ball and be the young guy. And because you always have the young guy, the oldest Marine at the ball hands a piece of cake to the youngest Marine at the ball, by way of the guest of honor. Everybody takes a bite along the way, passing of tradition kind of thing. And every year, everybody will be like, Major General so-and-so fought in 72 wars and he was in for 42 years and blah, 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 blah. And then the guest of honor, whoever that person is. And then, Second Lieutenant Parker commissioned in May of 1994. He's 21 years old. And everybody goes, like, it's funny that you're young. I don't know. We all do it. But I was a really young guy. And I think that showed in a whole lot of ways.
Wow. And you mentioned going to, there were two things that'll be coming up, but did you say you went to intel school at Fort Huachuca before you ended up with your scout sniper platoon?
Yeah, all en route. So I was probably in training for 15 months before I ever hit the fleet. And that's a good thing, because like I said, I was really young. So figure I was probably 22 when I hit the fleet, and still a baby, and I looked like a baby. But I mean, you say I don't mean to disrespect any 22-year-old person, just to say that I'm 53 now. I'm 22 is pretty young, and I spent a lifetime around young people. First as one, and then increasingly not. But I think, I was just really young. I had a lot to learn as a Marine. I had a lot to learn as a man. I had a lot of growing up to do. And the Marine Corps is both a good and bad place to grow up.
Yep, you definitely become a man pretty quick. I was a bit of a mama's boy, and I think you even told me or told Jack or something. You were a bit of a mama's boy, and you quickly learned getting into the Marine Corps, and then going through School of Infantry and all that. You quickly realized that I got to get on the ball here and start doing work. And seems like you did. You said it made you into a man quite quick.
I had a real rough time at officer candidate school, which should not be the place you have a particularly rough time. That's entry level training, and you pretty much should be able to turn your brain off, do what you're supposed to do. One, I have a hard time turning my brain off and doing what I'm supposed to do. It's just not my nature. It's always been like, if somebody goes, everybody's going to go left when we get up here to the corner, I'm going to be like, but what's to the right? And so there was some of that, and there was the mama's boy factor. Like, I didn't like being yelled at all. And I did not understand at then 20 years of age, whereas this is why I say I should have played sports. Kids that grew up being yelled at by football coaches had learned how to get yelled at. I had skipped all that because I didn't want to do any of that stuff. I wanted to ride my skateboard, listen to Athens bands, and hang out in the woods. And I did those things, but I didn't learn how to get yelled at. And so I'd learned very fast to toughen up. And I when I was finishing and thankfully graduating, the guy who was the platoon commander for my candidate platoon, a guy named Mike Ramondo, no idea where he is today. Mike Ramondo said to me, look, you got to get hard or die. And that's pretty dramatic, but he wasn't wrong either. I needed to harden up, and I had fortunately a year between graduating OCS and commissioning to really ponder all the lessons I had learned at Brownsfield and Quantico. And I left for Australia the day after I graduated officer candidate school, flew down there for 6 months for a semester of college. And so that was a place to just kind of decompress and think that through. And what do I really want to do with this? And I still was like, if I don't do all the stuff that I said I was going to do when I was 14 and 15 and 16 and following the path of all these guys that you named out, then I'm kind of bullshit. And I never want to be a guy who says he's going to do something and doesn't do it. And so I saw that ground intelligence officer thing, and that seemed like, yeah, I'm going to do that. So went through that training pipeline and off to a grunt battalion. But again, I was still 22 years old with no real experience. I had toughened up. IOC is phenomenal at toughening you up. I had a ROTC instructor who'd been a hockey player at Fordham. He was a Navy pilot. He was a tough guy. He's a hockey player from the Northeast. And he told me fire tempers steel. And IOC is great fire for tempering the steel of young men. And they do it just by making it hard and making you respond. And when I went through, there were no grades, which I thought was the coolest thing in the world, because you were allowed, they told you on day one, your only grade here is your reputation walking out of here. And it will either be good or bad. And it will precede you because the battalion executive officers do call the infantry officer course to say, hey, who are you sending me? And tell me about him. But it was a great place to learn to just throw a ruck on and start moving forward.
Man, oh man. And I think when, let's see here, basic school, infantry officer school, I think I had a photo of you graduating one of your courses with a Chris Herdica or
yeah, Recon was my roommate in college, actually. And we did go to OCS the same summer. He commissioned by PLC, the platoon leaders class. Yeah, there you go. At 135 pounds. Now, Chris was a state-ranked Illinois wrestler, and they take wrestling serious in the Midwest.
Oh yeah.
So he looks a little bigger than me because he was a little bigger than me, and I had lost a ton of weight. And yeah, there you go. That is graduation day from OCS.
Wow.
Some good detective work you did.
I tried to get ready. I dropped the ball a little bit on stuff, but I think we'll do some good off my snooping and pooping I did. So as we continue on, Fort Huachuca has come up, a lot lately. I don't talk about politics and all of that, but it seems like all of the conspiracy theory people are, talking about Fort Huachuca's, a secret base, or assassins and American spies are there. You know, Charlie Kirk's assassins may have been there, or all kinds of crazy stuff. And I know a lot of SOG guys who went through O&I at Fort Huachuca, and of course there's secret stuff going on there and all that. You know, nothing like y'all were doing in MARSOC and Delta. But could you tell us a little bit about, for the people that don't know about Huachuca, what goes on there? It's a base, but it's a school.
It's entry level training and then career level and advanced training for Army intelligence personnel. It's a training base. I mean, it's like Quantico's a training base. You know, Fort Jackson is a entry level.
So ain't no CIA spies showing up to show y'all some tradecraft on anything.
I mean, there's whatever intel training needs to happen there, and you've got the full breadth of intelligence skills. So in the sense that it's being trained, sure, but like I can walk around in DC and go, those dudes over there are training right now, because I just know how they're moving and I know what they're doing, you know. And there's some other cities throughout the Southeast that, you know, various units use for training. And there's times I've been in those cities just doing, you know, vacation or whatever, and be like, oh, look
there
at
they
that.
Are.
What he's doing.
Gosh, that's so cool. Once you guys are in a unit or are going through a course like that, you can kind of tell A, who's done it, but B, if you see something going on, you're like, oh, something's going on there and it looks familiar to me.
I sit in the airport in Charlotte and I can watch people walk through and go, those are SEALs. Those guys are SF guys. I know who those do. You know, I mean, they walk a certain way. You look a certain way. Everybody haircuts a certain way, whatever.
That's amazing. You being able to pick out guys the way it is nowadays. That's so cool. And I was trying to find. I'll get to that in a second. I'll find a picture of him. But you had gone to Fort Huachuca, and could you tell us a little bit about what it was like for you for your first job, shall we say, or billet? I believe you were with 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines as a scout sniper CO.
Well, a platoon commander, commanding officer is a actual term that means a higher level investment of command than you would have as a platoon commander. But yes, I was the platoon commander for the battalion scout sniper platoon. And that is where I met a bunch of guys I'm still friends with today. And I'm really, really proud of that fact that my lance corporals and sergeants from that still invite me elk hunting, and, you know, 35 years later or whatever it is, I don't do public math very well. But that I'm still friends with those cats. And even if I only see them every 5 or 10 years, that I still see them means a lot to me. And it was a great, from my personal perspective, it was a wonderful, wonderful job. Looking back at it through the lens of 27 years as a Marine officer, there were a lot of opportunities that 2nd Lieutenant Parker needed to develop that it would have helped to have had more adult supervision than I had. I was the first one of these 0203 ground intelligence officers that PK Van Riper created to hit Hawaii. So nobody knew exactly what that was supposed to be. And in fact, my original orders at Quantico said I was going to 1st Force Service Support Group in Camp Pendleton, which is like all the support units. I mean, it's all the support units collected together. And I was like, that is not what I signed up for. Not what Van Riper said we were supposed to do. And I went out for a week in the field, and I came back and I just had new orders pinned on my door. Just said 2-3 Scout Sniper Platoon. Okay, there we go. Cool. So I got out there, and it was very much you know, what do we do with this guy? So I got to go to SEER school because there was a SEER school quota, and they were just kind of like, that's probably the kid we ought to throw against it. Throw that kid. So I go to SEER school, and I went to this laser course, and I went to a couple of, and I would go to any school that they would show me. Like I was like, yes, I don't care what it is. I'll go sit somewhere for 5 days and learn something new. So I went to like this irregular warfare course, and I went to this weird law enforcement course. I didn't care. I just wanted to get quals and learn things. So that was really cool, but it was still a rough experience initially because when I got to the battalion, they had just gotten back pretty much, and were ramping up for a new deployment to Okinawa, and we're going to Okinawa for 6 months. Then it became 7 months. And I didn't have a platoon sergeant. Most of the guys who had deployed twice were either changing duty stations or getting out. So I had some salty lance corporals who had been on one deployment and thought they knew everything, as one deployment lance corporals do. I had a couple of corporals and sergeants, a sergeant, and then that was it. I mean, so imagine a boot lieutenant in charge of a bunch of relatively boot but salty Marines. And they were, I had nobody to teach me because I was in headquarters and services company where the XO had been put there because they needed somewhere to put him. And the CO was busy, and he's a good dude I'm still in touch with, really neat guy, worth talking to, actually good writer. And he'd been a recon man. So he was interested in what I was doing, but he also had trucks to deal with and food to deal with and all the various services aspects of an infantry battalion. So I'm just out in the woods by myself with these guys, and it would be like, I don't know, let's go to the range. But I don't know how to run a range, really. I just think we should go to the range. And I don't know how to keep these young Marines, none of whom are mama's boys, inside the lines. I'm 22 years old, and I don't really know where the lines are. I just had whatever they've taught me at Quantico and my instincts, some of which were good, some of which were bad. And then I got a platoon sergeant named Mike Kirchweil, and Michael Sean Kirchweil retired as a sergeant major back in, I don't know, maybe late aughts. And he was actually one of my roommates at 2-3's company first sergeant for the march up to Baghdad with Alpha 17. But Mike was amazing.
The Generation Kill guys?
No, I do know a fair number of those guys, but no, 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, Alpha Company. Their company commander was a guy named Tom LaCroix. If you read Bing West's book, The March
I know that name. Yes, sir.
If you open that book up in the pictures, there's a guy smoking a cigar, and it's Tom LaCroix, who was my roommate in Hawaii.
Wow.
And then Tom was the company commander for Alpha 17, and Mike Kirchweil, who was my state platoon commander or state platoon sergeant, was his company first sergeant for that deployment. He and I ran into each other later. He was the first sergeant for headquarters company of 7th Marines. So I got to see him in Al Asad in 2005, which was the last time I saw him. I tried to find him to invite him to my retirement because the guy had such a huge impact on me and a lot of other Marines. But he's, I don't know, he's like off the grid. I don't know where he is.
Man, oh man. And I gotta imagine, like you said, I mean, this is pretty tough work for an officer coming in, a new officer, and I know, like you said, you only had a few lower NCOs, didn't really have any full-on staff to start helping out there at the beginning. Was where was the thing? Did General Riper end up talking about needing the creation of a new MOS because of the stuff that had gone down during Desert Storms?
That was
leadership
for it was he felt like there was insufficient leadership within Marine Corps intelligence during Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and the way that, from his mind, was to build the leadership starting at the lieutenant level. So he created an air intelligence track, a counterintelligence track, a ground intelligence track. I feel like there was one other, signals. They put lieutenants in signals intelligence. I don't think they had lieutenants in any of those things prior to. And Van Riper's idea was, we got to get these guys tactical experience. Okay. They can't just go work in a skiff right away and just be like staring at computer screens and tabulating body counts. And so they need to lead Marines, right? Because that's what Marine officers, the business of Marine officers is leading Marines. And these guys were not getting that full experience to his mind. And whether that proved itself out, I don't know. I know of the 10 of us who were the first 0203s, and I say this with no intent to be self-deprecating at all, I was absolutely one of the least impressive. There were guys who were Harvard grads. There were guys who went on, to Harvard Business School. There were guys who retired as colonels. I don't think any of us retired as as generals. But of those 10 guys, I can think of at least 3 of them who spent, very, very impressive careers, retiring as colonels in Recon. Brian Gilman's one. Brian spent, who is now the executive director of a charitable outfit called Warriors in Quiet Waters. But Brian held every job there was to hold at 1st Recon Battalion for an officer, from platoon commander to battalion commander. And then he was the chief of staff at MARSOC when he retired, and I was working for him. Travis Homiak is another buddy of mine who was an 0203 right behind me. Travis, same deal. Travis held from platoon command to battalion command in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Recon Battalion, spent a lot of time at MARSOC, commanded the Raider Training Center. Brilliant guy, PhD now.
Jesus.
Really strong guys. The Marine Corps had a hard time keeping them in because they're like, we need guys who are fit enough to be infantry officers, but also have this kind of intellectual bent towards intelligence. And most of those guys were like, I either want to go do this at the national level, or I'm going to go to grad school and do my own thing, whatever it is. But the guys who stayed, I think I say this like from a mathematically calculable position, I had the least impressive career of all of them.
I mean, I know it's a running joke and half of it's in jest and everything, but it's always funny to me that, Marines are, I don't even know what the hell I was going with on that one.
I think you had a Freudian slip, is what I think.
Yeah, I think that I was going to call morons, but I think the overall public looks at y'all as morons and nothing but grunt trigger pullers when you find out. Even the younger guys, I mean, some guys get in trouble, all of them, even Vietnam, choice, go to jail, go to the Marine Corps, But it is surprising to see how many officers of lieutenant, captain, major, and then even the general officers that have degrees from, not just American University is a great university, but we're talking Ivy League schools, Brown, Harvard, Princeton, Yale.
Harvard right now. I've got a good buddy who came out of a trailer park in North Georgia and was a commandant's fellow at Brown.
I mean, come on, I mean,
these are not dumb people. And I also, because I exist in a writing world, I have a lot of people say to me, like, wow, I'm really kind of shocked at how many Marine Corps writers there are. I think I say this with no, what's the word I'm looking for? Starts with a P. Doesn't matter. I'm not being parochial. When I say this. Most of my favorite books about war and combat and leadership, particularly at the tactical level,
Marine officers
are Marines, period. I mean, Coral comes high. You look at like Gene Duncan's books that are kind of, they're campy, but they're real. You look, I'm just looking at my shelves right now, but so many very fine writers. Jim Webb, who we were talking about earlier, who was Secretary of the Navy and a senator.
Nolan, the Magnificent Bastards of Daldoy, the Tunnels of Coochie.
I don't think Nolan was a Marine, though. Nolan wrote about the Marines.
Yeah.
I'm talking about dudes who served.
Yeah.
Jim Webb's kid, Jim Webb Jr. I don't know if actually he may just be a James Webb with a different middle name. I don't know. Anyway, Senator Webb's son, Jim, is a friend of mine. Jim's a journalist. Jim's a really fine writer. There's just there's a long history of Marines not being dummies. We kind of all play it up like I'm just a knuckle dragger thing, but there's a lot of smart Marines.
You damn Skippy, and historically always has been. That's why it's always funny to me that you guys get the knuckle dragger. But I guess it's a good way to keep that Marine press as being the hard asses of the group.
Well,
don't want to be the brainiacs, but we'll dang sure crush your face in if you want us to.
Well, you can be a brainiac who can crush your face. I mean, again, Travis Homiak's a great example.
Absolutely.
Collegiate swimmer who is a PhD who wrote his doctorate in High German.
Damn. I mean, that's amazing. It's great to see that now the military, we've got a lot of issues we've got to work on, but it's nice to see there's actually some educated people starting to influx into the military to to help out as much as they can, because there for a while, I mean, you know, guys, when I know especially the Vietnam guys were wanting to take off to get a college degree to advance their career, they were looked down upon, or either, you know, if you do this and fail, you're gone, you're not getting another chance. So it's nice to see this thing is transformed to where not only being a proficient war fighter, but learning in school and getting an education can help better your men, and you pass it on while you're leading
I
other men.
don't believe dumb people can survive on the battlefield, and I say that about myself. Now, I was having a conversation with a Marine captain. Actually, he may be a major now. Anyway, I was talking to a relatively young officer the other day. I've only been retired 5 years, and the things that Marines will contend with on the next battlefield that we're seeing the Ukrainians already deal with, that we're seeing folks now with the Iran thing going on dealing with, like being hunted by a drone was not a facet that I had to contend with. That is a different world.
Oh yeah, and that's, well, I'm very, and this will be the end, but I'm very worried if we put ground troops on, and mothers, fathers, and us fellow Americans start seeing footage like of Ukraine, but with our boys, is gonna be bad. But you're there for a while. I believe a very instrumental gentleman, a First Sergeant John Meyer, ends up popping up for a little bit and
How
helping.
did you come up with that?
I've heard he was quite the leader, and would get hands on if he needed to.
Yeah, that's so funny that you bring up John Meyer. Well, yeah, he was the company first sergeant for Headquarters and Services Company, and he had been an interrogator translator before he was a first sergeant. Big dude, balding, like huge head, huge neck, just looked like a Marine first sergeant ought to look. I'm sure he had been a drill instructor, because most first sergeants had been drill instructors, but he was not a guy whose whole identity was wrapped up in being a hat. And he was just really cool. He always had a toothpick in the corner of his mouth. And I remember him saying to him one time, I was like, First sergeant, do you kiss your wife with that toothpick in your mouth? And he's like, yeah. I said, doesn't that hurt? He goes, not me. He was just always quick with a one-liner, but he'd come up to you, and I did some stupid stuff as a lieutenant, and he would correct you in a way that I guess theoretically is against Marine Corps discipline, but it was so Big Brother-like that it didn't feel wrong at all. And you knew if John Meyer was correcting you, he liked you. If he didn't like you, he'd let you just flail. And so I remember I did something particularly dumb one time. He's like, come here, Lieutenant. And I was like, yeah, what's up, First Sergeant? He said, lean forward. So I leaned forward, and he'd go, pow! And he'd punch you right in the center of your forehead and say, that's for being stupid, sir. And you were like proud that John Meyer took the time to punch you in the forehead. I was blessed to have him, and then even more so by a substantial margin. And again, all love John Meyer, who I'm sure, I know he retired as a sergeant major. But Mike Kirchweil, again, that guy was the key to my development as a young officer and a young man. Just a super staff NCO who was he had broken time. And so he had broken service time. He'd been out for like 5 years and came back in. And so when he came to me, he was a staff sergeant, but he was probably 33 or 34, which made him elderly in a group of 22 and 23-year-olds. So he's more mature, more experienced, less, and he had no interest in screaming at people. He would do it, and he was incredibly effective. He chewed my ass one time, and it was incredibly effective, and it was incredibly professional. Everything that guy ever did was just amazing. Like I sit here now, I talk about this guy, 30 years later. In fact, exactly 30 years later, because he was so good for all of us. And the enlisted guys that I had were saying, well, I'll hit them up sometime, or they'll hit me up and be like, hey, do you know where, now they still call him Gunny Kirchweil, but do you know where Gunny Kirchweil is? I was like, actually, unfortunately, no. And I've done a whole lot of Googling and a whole lot of searching, because I would love to talk to him. Because he was just this amazing guy, and I could go on and on. We could do a whole podcast about why I love Michael Sean Kirchweil.
That's all. The amazing NCOs, both Army, Marine Corps, or other branches, hearing older, experienced NCOs looking out for the younger guys, and especially a young officer, is just outstanding. How old are you at this point in time? 22, 23?
23. Yeah, if I sat and really did the math, I could tell you exactly. But I was 21 when I commissioned. So figure I was in Quantico in May of 94. So I was 21 then. I turned 22 at TBS. Probably turned 23 I was probably 23 when I hit the fleet.
Dang, that is very, very impressive. I mean, you were
18 to 24 months older than my Marines.
That is crazy. So you spend a period of time with the scout platoon and Mr. John, and are you tasked away from 2-3 as an intel officer, or are you an intel officer with 2-3?
No,
now?
Well, I was the scouts. We had an intel officer named Mike Davis, Captain Mike Davis, and so he was the S2 for the battalion, and I got my operational taskings, tactical taskings, really is a better way to say it, via Mike and the battalion commander and the battalion operations officer. So that was another kind of interesting thing, being a second lieutenant, frequently up at what seemed like a really high level, now seems like nothing to me, but back then it was like, wow, here I am next to these guys. They've been in like 15 years. And then sometimes I get to go out in the woods with my guys, but by and large, I was sitting in the headquarters tent, which is the drag of most of those kind of jobs. Like if I had it to do all over again, I have advised young officers, just, hey, go straight infantry, just go straight infantry, because that chance to sit in a fighting hole with your guys only comes once. But anyway, whatever, good and bad reasoning for all of those things. But I did spend a deployment with 2-3, and then I came back, or actually we were getting ready to redeploy from Okinawa back to Hawaii, and my boss, Mike Davis, called me in from the field, and he's like, hey, sit down. And I was like, I'm good, sir. What do you got? He's like, no, sit down. So I think he's going to tell me it's really bad news, like somebody died or something. And he's like, when we get back, you're going to go over to 1st Battalion, 12th Marines, which is the artillery battalion that is co-located with 3rd Marines. And I was like, what? Because they had been telling me I was either going to the regimental recon platoon, which those things still existed at the time, or I was going to redeploy with my scout sniper platoon. So I was thrilled at either option. And then, no, you're not. You're going to go be the intel officer at 1st Battalion, 12th Marines. I was super immature about the whole thing. I didn't, in my mind, going from an infantry battalion to an artillery battalion was not cool. And going from being a state platoon commander to being a staff officer was not cool. And I felt like I was getting posed, which again was a super immature reaction. It also was just a failure to understand how this whole thing works, which characterized a lot of my career. But I went over, I worked for a guy named Kevin Vietti, who was the battalion commander at 1st Battalion, 12th Marines. Kevin Vietti was probably one of the best officers I ever had the opportunity to work for or would. The guy was, when I say he was a war fighter, that's a term that's way overused. But he was a guy who had written a lot of the command and control pubs for the Marine Corps Command and Staff College. He was a real student of the game. And I remember our regimental commander saying, my artillery battalion commander is my best infantry battalion commander. The guy was just a warfighter.
Is that him right there?
No, that's one of my best friends. That's one of my Marines in Iraq. But no, I don't know if you could find. He was the regimental commander for 14th Marines, which is the reserve artillery regiment. But they use an active duty guy to command it. You might could find a picture of Vietti there, but anyway, just a phenomenal officer. And he took the time to call his first lieutenant intel officer. He just called me on the phone. I worked downstairs from him. He'd be like, hey, come upstairs. And yes, sir. I'm going to go running upstairs. and he'd have a whiteboard out and he'd have some pubs out and he'd start talking me through, do you understand how this works? Sir, I don't even know that that's a thing, much less how it works. So he starts explaining it to me, and to have a guy who would take that time to develop me professionally was an amazing opportunity that I largely ignored because I wanted to be out in the woods. And so, now I say that in the hopes that some first lieutenant who might watch this will go, hey, I need to be a sponge. I need to go every time I get something that happens to me, not go, this sucks. What can I get out of this? What can I learn? Because I'm going to need it down the road, and I'm going to be in a job someday that I want to be in again, where I'm going to use some pieces. So like the best command and control guy and who lived and breathed command and control, willing to just, like, I can remember him taking all his officers out just to sit on the edge of the ocean in Kaneohe Bay. And he'd bring, a bottle of bourbon and a rack of cigars, and he'd hand out cigars. He'd be like, all right, let's talk about warfighting. Okay, let's do it.
That is awesome.
Yeah, it was. He was amazing. And youth is wasted on the young. Brilliant commanders are wasted on immature first lieutenants. I needed to grow up some. I wish I had grown up before I had, come under his command. But and I worked for some other really good guys. I worked for a guy named Jim Day, who was the son of Lieutenant General James Day, who was a Medal of Honor recipient on Okinawa. That guy was super like hard on everybody, but for whatever reason, he liked me. And I've had that a couple times in my career where people were like, hey, look out for this guy. He's just a nightmare. And for whatever reason, that guy takes me under his wing. And that was Jim Day. He was our battalion XO. He took the time with me. Years later at JSOC, there was a guy named Randy Copeland who, people were like, good God, Copeland will wear you out. And he was just really, really, really cool to me. No idea why, but he was. And I really, really benefited from it.
That is crazy. You mentioned Kaneohe Bay, and I hope I'm not about to mess up our timeline here. But I found this awesome photo, and I can't remember if you mentioned it on any of your podcasts, but I thought I remember you mentioning it to me, or if I just saw this post. But you were with some Russians in Hawaii. What in the heck were the Russians doing at Kaneohe Bay?
So this was like one of those friendship things. Those are Russian Marines, naval infantry, really. And they were coming home from Chechnya.
Oh.
And they were en route home, and they did this cooperation from the sea deal where, these cats showed up. I had been in the fleet maybe 6 weeks, and my snipers dug a hide, if I was in this photo, like out in front of those bleachers. And you would always do these capabilities exercises, especially if you got a bunch of Russian Marines, like, let's show them what we can do and hopefully scare them in the process. But it also was a whole lot of drinking with Russian naval infantry. But, you go and a infantry company does an assault and they shoot a bunch of stuff moving and by bounds up the range there. Because there's to the left, there's a big hill / mountain that's the backstop for that range at Kaneohe, or at least was then. I don't know if they still use it or not. And then we had dug a hide in the ground. So at the end, the snipers are popping balloons from their hidden position, and then they stand there with snipers, stand up, and they stand up, and everybody's amazed because the sniper's 30 feet in front of them and they never knew it or whatever. So we had spent a week digging that hide and camouflaging it, and I was just standing around being an extraneous lieutenant trying to be a part of things that I didn't really know how to be a part of. But that's what that was. That was the late 90s. It was the peace dividend, and the Cold War's over, and let's meet the Russians. And it was fascinating too, because, with the exception of guys who had done Desert Storm and Desert Shield in 91, it was very rare to have anybody around you who'd had combat. Now, all these guys are coming home from Chechnya, and where had their asses handed to them.
Yes, that hellhole. I mean,
and honestly, rightly so. But this was just, combatants and like lower level guys. I remember this guy coming up to me. He's just rattling on and on and on about, I keep hearing him say sniper. And and that's the only word I can pick up. And first there was like a PAO, a public affairs officer, was with us, and he was like, he's just talking about how amazing our snipers are. And then the interpreter goes, no, he's saying he got shot by a sniper. He's like showing us this big scar. So it was an interesting thing for a lieutenant to be like, oh wow, I'm gonna do this. Like, this is what I'm gonna do for the rest of my life. That's amazing.
God, I mean, clearly, a lot of combat. Were any of these guys Spetsnaz or any of their special boat crews?
No idea. I mean, they were an infantry battalion.
Man,
coming home on a boat, and as I say, we had some of the more senior officers from the battalion went to the boat and got hammered with them, and they all hung out, and then those dudes came over for our capabilities demonstration. And of course, we were told that, oh, these guys are amazed by U.S. Marines. They're super, they think you guys are unreal. And I don't know if that's true or not, but it was a cool experience nonetheless.
Everybody got along though, no troubles and fights.
Yeah, absolutely. It was just
excellent.
Like trading patches and handshakes and hanging out and drinking toast to one another. Again, it wasn't. I mean, the Soviet Union had fallen. So I was like,
detente was going on, and nobody.
Now we don't even know it's Russia in 1998. It's not Russia in 2026.
No, not even of 2001, to be honest.
Right.
Wow, man, that is so cool. I mean, not many folks can say they got to host and demonstrate for a Russian naval group coming straight back from Chechnya, no less. I'm sure that was nice. Because I got to imagine there are R&R places in Chechnya, or if they were even able to do it, was a hellhole. And them getting to Hawaii, God
I don't even
almighty.
know what route they would have taken for that to be the case. So, I mean, maybe Russia decided to give them a good deal and was like, hey, load up, you're going to Hawaii. But
wow,
that was the deal.
That's just cool historically right there. And especially you being right there with it is just really, really cool, man. And you do the intel officer route for a bit, and is this where you become, I don't want to say disillusioned, but you begin to kind of think about maybe I'm not doing what I want to do, I might be ready to leave?
Well, it was a case, again, a mix of both immaturity and a desire to do some specific things. And I told you, like, I'm not athletic by nature, for example. I'm just not. Like, I'm a chubby kid is really what nature meant me to be. And for 20 years, I ran ultra marathons because I said that was when I was 12 years old. I said, that looks cool, because I read an article in Outside Magazine about a runner named Chuck Jones. And the guy was a real runner, like a super competitive runner. And it talked about him running 100 miles. And I was like, that sounds like, I was always attracted to things that make people go, why in the hell
are you doing that?
And so I started running ultra marathons when I was 28, I think, despite having a body that, is really meant to pick heavy things up and put them down. And I loved that, right? So that was a challenge. I had always said, I'm going to be a recon Marine. I wanted to be a recon Marine in the way other kids want to be, the pitcher for the Braves. And I just felt like, you ever watch the movie Fast Times at Ridgemont High?
Yes, sir.
There's a scene where Spicoli's getting squared away by Mr. Hand, and he's like, if we don't find a set of cool rules, we'll just be bogus too. I didn't want to be bogus. And having admired and hero worshipped all these recon men for my whole life. I mean, I was still reading those books when I was a lieutenant. I remember Phase Line Green by Nicholas Warr. I read. He was, I think, 1st or 2nd Recon Battalion.
Great book.
Or Way City rather. Great book. I wanted to be one of those guys. So I'm getting ready to PCS out of Hawaii. I said, I want to go to Recon. And there was 3rd Recon Company back then in Okinawa. And I wasn't really interested in going to Okinawa, but whatever. And my monitor, who's the guy who moves all Marine officers in a career field around, said, hey, Lieutenant, that's a neat story, but not particularly interesting. You're going to go to 1st Marine Division or 2nd Marine Division to work in the G2, the General's Intel Shop. And then if you want, you can work your bolt to take the recon indoc from there. I was like, I'm not smart, but that sounds like going around your ass to get your elbow. And I don't think anybody's going to care what First Lieutenant Parker thinks when he gets to the general staff. And so I called the reserve force recon unit in Mobile because I told them I'm getting out. And everybody, when you get out, people start trying to take care of you. And I really say this with appreciation. The regimental S2 worked a deal. He's like, I can get you orders to 3rd Recon Company in Okinawa. And I probably should have taken that because some really good dudes came through there and it would have been a really good time. But I'd just come from Okinawa. I didn't want to go live there full time. And I was ready to go to grad school. Speaking of needing to grow up. And so I got out and I went down to Mobile, Alabama after I surfed my way from Oceanside to Whidbey Island, Washington. And I stayed with a bunch of my snipers going up the West Coast. And then I drove home to Georgia. 2 weeks later, I was in Mobile, Alabama, just getting my ass handed to me by recon guys. And so I was a part-time recon guy and took the NDOC down there. I'll never forget that. I got to the end of the NDOC and there was a gunny who was one of the guys that had given me the NDOC. And I damn near drowned on the thing. Like they had to pull me off the bottom of a swimming pool at a YMCA in Mobile, Alabama. And he was like, well, sir, you can't swim a lick, but it seems like you're willing to die to be here. So you're probably trainable. My dog's about to go lunatic. And so they did train me, and I did go on to the amphib recon school and then, jump school and dive school and all that stuff. And I spent 8 years total as a member of that command and formed some great friends and had some great experiences.
Wow. And it's always interesting because I'm hoping to go to SOAR this year, but depending on where the Force Recon reunion is, if it's in Mobile or either Atlanta or Florida, I'm going to go to the Recon reunion this year. But it was so cool to find out that 3rd Force was at Mobile. I didn't know that until talking not only earlier to my Force Recon guys who were in 3rd Force in Vietnam, and then figuring out when they decommission, they come down to Mobile. But that's crazy that they're down there in Mobile. And was there at this point in time, it being reserves, were there active duty was like 1st and 2nd active duty, and then 3rd and 5th or 6th?
In ways, it's hard to follow because the lineage of 3rd Force Recon has changed. I think they were like 5th Recon Battalion at one time. I can remember seeing the lineage chart that hangs in it. But anyway, you had 1st Recon Battalion. This is again late 90s when I took the NDOC. But you had 1st Recon Battalion and 1st Force Recon Company on the West Coast, active duty units, both of them command selected lieutenant colonel commands. Then you had a mirror of that on the East Coast. You had 2nd Recon Battalion and 2nd Force Recon Company, again, both command selected 05 billets. You had, it changed names multiple times in Okinawa, right? You had 3rd Recon Company and 5th Force Recon Company. Then you had, I think for a brief period of time, it was like 5th Force Recon Battalion. Then it was 3rd Recon Battalion and Force folded and became a Deep Recon Company, on and on and on. And now pretty much as it stands, and an active duty guy would have to, absolutely correct me, but it mostly stands now that it's all 05 battalion commands with a Deep Recon Company or a Force Company, whatever they're calling it, led by a major within the unit. So it's not a standalone command, which to me is a bummer. But that's manpower math. I mean, people are always like, "Oh, that's stupid." Blah, blah. Well, when you sit at headquarters Marine Corps and you move all the things around, it probably makes sense. So but 3rd Force was the last independent Force Recon Company in the reserves, because we had 3rd and 4th Force Recon Company, which there was a detachment from 4th in Hawaii when I was there. And then their headquarters was in Reno, Nevada.
Whoa.
And then Third Force was always in Mobile. And I remember,
wow.
yeah. And then ultimately they rolled into 4th Recon Battalion and moved to Long Beach, I think, and became probably the force company of 4th Recon Battalion. Third Force only folded the flag as Third Force, I think, in the last 12 months. And they now, as I understand it, belong to 4th Recon Battalion as well.
Wow. Holy crap. Yeah, guys, you can see why you think Vietnam's weird when first leaves and third is the only company company in Vietnam. And then, like you said, they were under first or third recon for it. Yeah. Unless you are on top of it, it becomes a utter nightmare trying to keep up with the foldings and the machinations of who they're under or what they're doing.
And it's almost meaningless unless it's intuitive if you're a Marine, like the why of things, but it's almost meaningless to somebody outside the Marine Corps as to the why and wherefore, unless you're super interested in the nuance of history.
Minutia of everything. Could you tell us a little bit about what your NDOC was like?
I took we had a scout sniper NDOC when I was at that unit. And that's funny. I don't even know where that picture came from. Good job. I mean, I know where it came from, but I don't know how you got it. My dad's somewhere in that shot, I'm sure.
He's in the back row somewhere. I forgot where he was listed.
Anyway, I'm in the far left, looking again 12 years old. That you got the cursor on Kevin Dale, who retired as a master gunnery sergeant. Let's see, that's Noble to my left. I mean, anyway, whatever. Guys that I can and probably am okay identifying. Yeah, there's Kevin Dale. That guy on the far right retired as a CH-53 pilot. The guy immediately to his right, unfortunately, passed in the last 12 months. Really good guy, Force Recon guy, Raider. And then we worked together at the Raider Training Center. As he was a civilian at that point. But anyway, that was my amphib recon school class, which back then was on the East Coast. You had one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast, because typically the Marine Corps is kind of mirror image. And it was at Fort Story, Virginia, in this old Nike missile site built into a bunch of sand dunes. You had sand on you all the time. We started that class with 36 guys, and those are the 14 still. There were 14 still standing at the end, and only 10 of us graduated. And I think, I guess everybody in that. No, not everybody in that picture graduated that class. Some of them recycled for a second or third time.
And
then went back. And I think everybody in that picture ultimately served in Marine Reconnaissance for somewhere between 4 and 30 years. Like I say, Kevin Dale, who's the leftmost guy in front of me in the front row. Kevin was a big dive guy and ran the dive school, and really neat guy. Retired as a master guns. He's a corporal. Picture.
Nice. Sounds like a hell of a crew right there. Then
it was interesting. That was a tough man. That was a man school.
And a lot of people, not to bring up other units and all of that, but amphib recon, I guess from Vietnam onward, and then I guess y'all have the NDOCs and everything. But could you explain kind of like what exactly the NDOC is? Are y'all doing drown proofing and running? And
some of it the Force Reconnaissance / Reconnaissance NDOCs are pretty much professionalized and standardized. Back in the 90s, like in a scout sniper platoon, our immediately adjacent platoon in 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines had a 5-week NDOC that they taught skills and they evaluated them tactically. At 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines, we basically just kicked them in the junk for about 48 hours. And that the Force Recon NDOC was that with more pool time. I took it because when I was a reservist, if you had not gone to recon school, you took the NDOC that was your reserve weekend, the entirety of your weekend. So once a month, I would drive to Mobile, Alabama from Athens, Georgia, and get kicked in the crotch for 48 hours and drive back. And I did that 9 times. And I feel like, yeah, I couldn't swim worth a shit the first time, but I probably earned it along the way by doing it 9 more times or 8 more times. But typically the NDOC has people show up from whatever unit they're coming from. And nowadays they have a very, very industrial process. There's a physical assessment test before you can go. But back in the 90s, it was, do we feel like you're trainable? Can you take the pain? And I have a high pain tolerance, and that is about all I got going for me.
Which is a good thing, though.
I mean, it's critical, but again, not athletic, not naturally a good runner, not naturally a good swimmer at all, or even nor had I been trained to be a swimmer particularly well. But yeah, those guys are doing NDOC kind of stuff, and you just hate life for the better part of 2 days, along with completing physical events. You take the Marine Corps physical fitness test, you take the Recon physical assessment test now. I think back then it was the PFT and maybe a 5-mile run, and then pool time, and then a 500-yard swim, and then there was a lot of water treading, holding 10-pound weights in your hands, and you got to keep them dry, so like don't water. And then you go train, and like finning 2,000 meters a day was just part of the deal. And the two schools, there was the West Coast school and the East Coast school. Now it is all centralized on the West Coast under the Reconnaissance Training Company, which is part of the Advanced Infantry Training Battalion at Camp Pendleton. But in the old days, it was in-house at the Force Recon Company or at the Recon Battalion until you went to school. And the school obviously was standardized, but it wasn't even perfectly standardized between the coasts because the geography was different. Where you went for your amphib phase was different. So on the East Coast, we went to Key West, which is a beautiful place to go in February. And it's a ton of fun, right? Except for the actual sucking life part of it. But on the West Coast, the surf is freezing cold and they have big waves. On the East Coast, if you're down at Key West, it's completely flat. So surf passage in a Zodiac on the West Coast is very, very different from surf passage in a Zodiac on the East Coast. So the way the East Coast guys would handle it back then to make it, achieve parity is they would just wear you out. You just got thrashed all the time. And I'll never forget, there was a guy named Mike Crawford who was our instructor. And later, if you ever watch that show, Making the Cut.
Oh, yes.
So Crawdad is in that as a master sergeant. I knew him as a sergeant at Amphib Recon School, and he'd be like, "Hey guys, I got a fun game we're going to play." But to his great leadership credit, he always played the fun game with you, so it wasn't like he was just standing there hammering you. He was participating fully and inspiring you because he was in better shape than everybody. But like, we're going to run 17 laps of the compound, and then you got to do 100 pull-ups and then do 100 push. And he do it all with a smile on his face. Like, it seemed sort of like fun when Mike Crawford was running it. But yeah, you got hammered at that school. And that's, as I say, we started with 36 guys on training day 1 and we graduated 10.
I mean, all of this, and I was leading into it. I mean, the SEALs have Hell Week and all of that, but I mean, this looks exactly like y'all are. I mean, the SEALs say they have the toughest, school in America, which I fully don't believe that's true.
I totally would agree with that. I mean, but what I would say is, if you're bringing entry-level sailors into the special operations community, especially back in the day before they had street to fleet commandos, where you take a high school graduate who happens to be a good swimmer and runner, and we put him into a prep program, and then we send him to BUD/S, boom, and he's never been anything but a SEAL. Well, back in the old day, you had a guy who was a sonar technician or whatever, black shoe sailor. He's not a Marine. I mean, that's not a dig. He's a sailor. But I get a kid who's been to School of Infantry. And again, back in the old days, you've had John Daly on here. A Marine would have some tactical acumen. A Marine had spent some time in a real tactical unit, had hunked a ruck, worked a radio, shot a gun, maybe called for mortar fire. Like he had done some of the skills required for reconnaissance and had been through a hardening process. Buds needs to be Buds because Buds is taking different material and turning it into a commando. Whereas Amphib Recon School is turning Marines into Recon Marines. And there's absolutely a hardening process there because, water is the great leveler. I had a guy, and I only because I don't need to put his business in the street, but I say this with great admiration. I served with a guy who was a Force Recon Marine, and he was just cursed with an incredible physique. He had no body fat whatsoever. He looked like he'd been carved out of, wood. And he sank in the pool. So he had to go through recon school twice because he freaked out in the water one time, understandably, when he couldn't stay afloat. To his great and eternal credit, he wanted it bad enough to go back and do it all over again, all of it from day one. Damn. And then he had the same experience at dive school. So if you want me to go to war with a guy, I'd just soon go with a guy who's willing to hate life at both of those schools twice to get it done, as I would as a guy who just flashed right through. That's my personal prejudice, but that's the kind of person who's coming to those courses or is at the course by the time you get done with the weed out portion.
Damn. Did the Marine Corps ever institute anything like the Navy or the Army with that X-ray, like you said, street to commando?
In fact, that picture of my ARS graduation, a number of those Marines were some of the very first ones to go through that program. And it is very well organized and very industrial now, in that those Marines go to boot camp, they go to School of Infantry, or actually they go to Marine combat training because they don't send them to SOI. They just need them to get the 30-day primer that all non-infantry Marines get on more advanced Marine stuff post boot camp, because they're then going to ARS BRC, Basic Reconnaissance Course. It was Amphib Recon School on the East Coast before that closed. But those guys and gals will get all the advanced skills they could ever need when they go through BRC. And then they pipeline them in a way that we didn't do back in my day. It was very catch as catch can. Now they go from BRC, they go to jump school, free fall school, then they go to dive school, and they go to SEER school. Their unit is there at the Reconnaissance Training Center, as opposed to in the old days, you went to your unit because you took the NDOC at the unit. The unit had to wait until they got you orders to go to BRC. You go to BRC, go back to the unit. Now you're waiting on a chance to go to jump school. Now you're waiting on a chance. I mean, there's probably goods and bads to both of those. John Daly could speak to it much more effectively than I. There's probably some goodness in going back, because then you've got people you're operating. Like, you're in the woods. Your radio operator is going to train you on how to work a radio.
Oh, yeah. OJT at its finest.
Yeah. So, I mean, and then when you go to school, you've already been OJT'd for that stuff. So there's goods and bads, but it is a much more refined process now.
Wow, that's awesome to hear. The Marine Corps being behind on the JSOC and the SOCOM and all of that, it's nice to see streamlining going on. You see even just grunts now with their suppressors and their beautiful scopes and magnifiers and all of that. They've got, it seems like, high-speed gear now. It's nice to see the Marine Corps becoming the force. Well, they've always been the force, but it's nice to see them getting weapons and all the tools that the Army has had since, OEF 1 and 2 and all of that. So,
I mean, how you spend your money tells you really what you value. And I got one dog going nuts in the yard and one dog trying to join her.
If you need to handle them, you can. I can hold it off to you.
That'd be all right. But I remember years ago, I worked for a guy who had been at JSOC before I worked for him at MARSOC. And I remember we were just having a classic discussion / debate. There's always the, one Marine could beat up 11 paratroopers, meaningless garbage. But he was saying, do you think that any Marine regiment or battalion in any Marine regiment is the equivalent of a Ranger battalion. And I was like, yeah, of course, obviously. And he was like, okay, cool. Go over to 6th Marines or 8th Marines and tell me how many of those Marines have nods. This was, 2006, 7 timeframe.
None of them.
And it was probably, 1 in 4, 1 in 5. Tell me who has an optic. Tell me who has this. Are they truly night capable? That I was like, well, of course. Really? Can they all see at night? Well, no. Okay. Now go to 1st Ranger Bat. Go to 2nd Ranger Bat. 3rd Ranger Bat.
All of them.
Every person has nods. Every person has kit. Every person has trained at night, done reverse cycle work, etc. I mean, and that was, humbling and frustrating for me. But then years later, I got to watch the Ranger Regiment at work. And I became, an unabashed fan of the Ranger Regiment. Like,
absolutely. Oh God, you even from Vietnam to now, especially you have to respect what the Rangers are doing. I mean, they've become a behemoth under their own now. I mean,
and I would say even then, they are truly what they claim to be, which is America's premier
light
action raid force and elite light infantry force. And they are, and I say this as a Marine, like they're everything that every Marine regiment claims to be.
Mm-hmm.
And that's no shade on my very beloved Marine Corps or
God, no.
I admire the Marine infantry above all other aspects of the Corps. And I spent a whole lot more time in other aspects of the Corps. But it's just a mathematical fact.
Yeah, absolutely. Hell, you even said, if you could go back, I think you even said one time that you would have just gone and been a ground pounder and a infantry officer, which is pretty telling in that itself. So you mentioned pipelines down there at Mobile with 3rd Force, and you not a good swimmer, but you passed because you're willing to die in the pool. The NCO said. And then I believe you become dual cool and also not MEF, but you are HAHO qualified, correct?
Yeah, I never did go to free fall school. I never liked jumping out of airplanes, to be perfectly honest.
I don't blame you. I don't like riding in them.
No, I don't either. And I like it less every year. I'm not even kidding on that. Like, it's more of a white knuckle experience every time. But I went and did the HAHO transition in the early 2000s. We were trying to figure out how to get more Marines capable of deploying via a viable and useful airborne system. And static line parachuting is real fine if you're in 175 and seizing an airfield. It's real fine if you're in the 82nd and you're doing a mass tactical deployment of a division or a brigade. It is functionally useless for a reconnaissance element. And so all us guys were MC-1 Bravo static line parachute qualified. Well, if you can fly a helicopter or airplane over low and slow, you can land. So
I don't need to jump.
So let's figure out a way to make jumping useful. And so what they came up with was the MC-5 military free fall parachute would be static line deployed. And so you go do this HAHO course where you can now jump at HAHO height, but you're under canopy the minute. Yeah, that's me at the HAHO transition course. Again, looking like take your kid to work day. I like to say I'm the only guy who can make high altitude parachuting look nerdy. But yeah, so you go out there and you're jumping at, I think the highest, maybe 8,500. I think we were supposed to jump at 13.5 and got canceled, if I remember right. But whatever, you're jumping at HAHO height or halo height. You're just flying. You're under canopy for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, you could literally cross a border. You're up there so long.
That was the tactical consideration. I can exit the aircraft at a high altitude release point, and I can fly a long way, and we can fly in formation together, and then land together and move off the drop zone together. Yeah, let's see. That's one of the MC1
C5.
I think anyway. That's your basic static line parachute. It's a quote steerable round parachute. Like many other things in the Marine Corps, we went and did the MC5 Hey-Ho transition course, and I never saw it again.
Of course. So you weren't a fan of jumping then?
No, I just don't like heights.
I don't blame you at all. I question these guys that love it so much, and I guess being an SF guy, y'all love a lot of stuff that normal people are scared of. But it's nice to see some of y'all guys actually don't like jumping.
I know a ton of guys who will tell you, yeah, every jump's a night jump for me. But there's this old story about the 101st, and I've told it a million times. I don't know if it's true or not. Supposedly Eisenhower's out and reviewing and inspecting troops before they jump into Normandy, and he's talking to some like private, and he says, "Son, do you really like jumping out of perfectly good aircraft?" And the kid's like, "No, sir, I don't like it at all. But I like being with guys that like jumping out of perfectly good aircraft." And that was a lot of my career. I like diving. I'm a recreational diver. I felt like a super commando when I was, diving Draeger.
So you went to Key West Combat Dive School?
I went to Marine Corps Combat Dive School in Panama City.
Oh, cool. Panama City down here then. Awesome. Yeah. Very cool. Before I knew it, I only went through there. We don't go anymore. We used to live at the beach for a little bit of time, and I'd always see what I thought were aviators because the gold wings, but it ended up being Navy SEALs and Recon men. I was like, what? Yeah. Oh my God. Wow. Okay. So we've gotten Hey-Ho and Yuma, Arizona. I've heard when y'all get y'all's pre-mission operation orders for 2004 for Iraq. Nope, scratch that. First off, where were you during 9/11?
I was in Simon's Island, Georgia. So I was a reservist, and I was working as a pharmaceutical salesman in civilian life, and I was selling psychiatric drugs. So my job was to go see psychiatrists and encourage them. Real quick, is the sanding going on outside my door messing you up?
It's not. That's not an issue. We're good.
So I was at the King and Prince Hotel in St. Simon's Island, Georgia, and I'd been out late the night before with one of my client doctors, and I got up and I went on a long run on the beach. Beautiful day, and I came back to the King and Prince, and the first tower had been hit. I called my dad, and I was like, "You watching this?" And then we watched the second tower get hit, and then we watched the second tower, the first tower go down. And I remember saying to my dad, like, we just watched like 15,000 people die. And so I checked out of the hotel because I obviously was not going to go talk to psychiatrists that day about medicine. And I called the reserve unit. Again, how immature and unrealistic an understanding I had of the world. I was like, "When are we going?" He's like, "Settle down, Beavis. We'll see." He said, "But it's cool. Everybody's calling and asking that same question." And I drove down to Jacksonville, Florida, and / St. Augustine. I lived in St. Augustine. My wife worked in the tallest building in Jacksonville. She was then my girlfriend. And so they were evacuating that building, and we went to St. Augustine, and just like everybody else, just sat and watched on TV for the next 2 days. Like, what do we do? We went and tried to give blood. You couldn't go anywhere. You couldn't even get to a blood donation center. It was wild.
Man, I was a kid and then about to go to lunch, and we saw it, and us being by Fort Rucker, they immediately locked down everything and had state troopers with ARs and shotguns and all of that. Totally unnecessary, but thinking Fort Rucker, as important it was, they had no idea. And I can only imagine you being a highly skilled, trained operator and Marine, even being in the reserve, like you said, when the hell are we going and striking back? So I can imagine what must have been going through the boys' heads seeing this and saying, we got to get over there. But from what I've heard or understood, it isn't too long before y'all get mission training for Iraq in 04 OEF2. But I thought I understood that y'all have the absolute worst conditions for a base and training base getting ready that I've ever heard of in any warfare or any unit having to train in.
Yeah, I'm still really angry about it, but it feeds a fair bit of writer stuff now. One of these days I'll write this, but we had gone up from Mobile to North Carolina.
Camp Lejeune?
Yeah. To set up our summer training with 2nd Force Recon. And we flew to Raleigh, North Carolina, me and one other reservist and 2 of the active duty staff. And by the time we got there, they said, hey, send, one of the reservists and one of the active duty guys home. We got to prepare to deploy order to Iraq. And we'd all been asking for like 3 years now, when are we going to Afghanistan? When are we going to Afghanistan? Never did. And so, okay, fine, we're going to Iraq. And we went ahead and laid on, instead of laying on summer training for just random reserve training, we were now building a training package to get ready to deploy we had to send 1 platoon to 1st Force Recon immediately, and then 2 platoons to 2nd Force Recon that summer. So I was like in my head, I'll finish a year of law school, which is where I was at that point in time. I've been at Florida State University for 2 years, or better part of 2 years. And I was the operations officer for the reserve company. I thought, well, if I hang out and go on the 2nd deployment and go as a platoon commander, and I tell you, I always wanted to do what I always wanted to do, and here's my chance to do what I wanted to do. So I worked angles, bluntly, to make that happen, and showed up at Camp Lejeune in probably June of 2004, and they put us into French Creek Barracks, which were probably then already scheduled for demo. And we had, I don't know, probably 70 Marines living there in French Creek, all of us out of 3rd Force. We had 1.5 functioning toilets. It was, and then the other thing was, we're like, okay, well, at least we laid on all this training back in December, so let's get to executing this training package. And I go over to the headquarters at 2nd Force, and we're like, hey, what are our ranges? What days do we have what? And they're like, what are you talking about? We start digging through a guy's inbox. Well, there's all the training support requests we had put in back in December. He'd never even dealt with them. So we made up a training plan. I had some guys who had done the march to Baghdad with the Generation Kill crowd in 1st Recon. And those guys had just come back from combat and were like, let's go back. So they knew we were going, and one of them called me and was like, hey, sir, just want to talk to you, see if maybe we could go with you. I'm like, man, I need bodies. Yeah, come on. And so some of them were guys I'd known from 3rd Force who had gone to 4th Recon Battalion just because of moves and stuff in their civilian lives. And so they came back and we deployed, but we didn't know what we were going to be doing. And we didn't even know how to plan a training package for it. And so we had been told at one point, hey, you're probably going to be doing PSD work, personnel security details in Baghdad. So we got the Secret Service cats in Mobile to come over and spin us up on, convoy ops and like, how do you move a guy from a vehicle to a building? Wow. That was dumb. We then go to Camp Lejeune and spent a lot of nights driving around in Humvees on nods, which actually proved to be a useful skill. But we were doing it like from a snap vehicle control point or a reaction to ambush perspective. And we needed to be, in retrospect, now that I know what I know, we needed to be hitting targets. That's pretty much all we did. The guy who was the OPSO for the company, I'll just say, wasn't thinking a lot about it, or he was stuck in a legacy way of thinking. And so he was like, I got 3 platoons going. One is the raid force, one is the covering force, and one is the RNS force, which is how it works on a MU. And so what little interoperability training we did was focused on deploying like a MU maritime special purpose force. And when we got in country, we were 3 independent raid forces operating from the western border all the way to Al Asad. So probably about 100-kilometer span.
Damn.
That was a lot more than you asked, but
no, that's
still livid about it.
I can see why. That is absolutely, reprehensible, and asking men to go into combat like that, and then the training issue, that's absolutely pathetic. That's just nonsense. God. So when August of 2004 is when you guys actually get into Iraq?
Yeah.
And where y'all where do y'all first land and set up?
Every at least I think every Marine, most Marines were coming through Al Assad at that point. So we got to Al Assad for now what would have been OIF 2 TAC 2. And within a few days had convoyed 70 or 80 clicks to Al Qaim, which is almost the Syrian border. And so there was this little fob out there that had been a train station and a repair facility. And we moved out there. So 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, Tom LaCroix and Sean Michael Kirchwell's old unit was there under the command of a guy named Chris Woodbridge. And then my CO was Lieutenant Colonel Pete Petronzio, who will appear later. And Pete was co-located with Woodbridge, and we were sort of like the raid force for 17. 17 had a huge span of responsibility. They had a rifle company in Husayba, which at the time was certainly one of the most dangerous, if not the most dangerous place in Iraq. We had a force platoon co-located with them. They were living in absolute savagery. They lived in a building that only had 3 sides and part of a roof, and it had a stream flowing through it, and I'm not really sure what that stream was, but those guys were out there. We were at Al Qaim, and then we had the active duty force platoon from 2nd Force went to Al Assad and was the core of a raid force for 7th Marines, working time sensitive stuff. I say we were kind of the pipe swingers for 17 because, again, they had a rifle company in Husayba, just trying to keep the lid on that place. They had a rifle company at ASP Wolf, which was a huge Iraqi ammo supply point that had massive holes in the fences. So, the resistance guys or the insurgents, whatever you want to call them, were driving in there and arming themselves with truckloads of munitions. And then you had a company at Al Qaim, which was local security, and God bless those guys. They were largely organized as mobile assault platoons, which, as near as I could tell, meant driving around until you found an IED.
Jeez Louise, God. Those early days, well, that technically wasn't early days, but those landmines and IEDs, jeez Louise, God. The group, I can't remember if when y'all first got there, were y'all solo, or did y'all actually hook up with Iraqi and a 5th group ODA for a period of time? Or
there was a 5th group ODA there. They really didn't have a partner force, so they left. I don't know how long they were there. I won't name the ODA commander. Great guy. He was a prior Marine. He'd actually been at TBS in the class behind mine.
Oh.
And then went over to SF. And I know he retired. I think assuming he retired. I know he was a colonel last time I knew. Anyway, great dude. Bunch of great dudes in that 5th group team. But they didn't have a partner force. So they were functioning as like they were a 9-man raid force. They'd had 1 soldier killed, and they were under strength when they deployed, and yet they were still out there getting after it. And so they partnered with us, and we kind of became the hired muscle for targets that, we would. I remember one night rolling out with them. They had like a little shack they needed to hit because there were maybe some computer stuff they could exploit, was what they knew. And they had a lot of capability to develop information that we didn't have. Stuff that, later in MARSOC I came to understand very well, but they would develop a target and it would just be too big for them. So one night we drove out and they provided security for us after we provided security for them on their little shack target. And they basically ran in, kicked the door, grabbed some stuff, ran back out. And then we drove to our target, and they sat on their gun trucks while we all went and did our thing. And they were great dudes. They got better supplies than we did, so we'd go down sometimes to eat snacks or drink milk, which we didn't have. So it was a really, really interesting deployment. I mean, it was like all Marine Corps deployments. It was live close to the bone.
Man, it's always crazy. First getting in country, seeing and hearing what's going on, trying to get the lay of the land and what exactly is going to be going on. And did a 10th group ended up following them? Following up after.
The team from 10th group ended up showing up, and again, they ended up leaving too, because there was not a partner force. And if SF guys don't have people to train, then they can be used elsewhere. Either they can go train some guys, or you can figure out a different task for them. But where we were was apparently not the place that the siege of SODIF decided they needed to be. So that I knew they moved them east, but to where, I honestly don't know. Probably Baghdad is my guess, but we stayed out there for 7 months, just 25 Marines against the world.
And what time period are we in right now? 06 or 04?
In March of 05, I think.
Okay. I had a question that popped up on one of your Instagrams. Great photo, and you wrote about it. Y'all were on a hilltop or watching out for something during the election days or something, or parliamentary elections.
Wow, where did that come? It's got watermarks on it. I don't even know. Fascinating. Oh, that's not watermarks. That's Instagram. Yeah, so we got tasked during the first Iraqi elections, along with the platoon that had been in Husayba. They had retrograded back to Al-Qaim at that point, because we were getting pretty close to getting out of country. And they occupied a spot forward of the polling stations. 1-7, with some of our snipers in support, was securing the polling station and all the inner perimeters. And they put 2 force platoons out, like way out, relative to the polling stations. And they were like, hey, influence the area. And the guy who was the OPSO for 1-7 is a good friend of mine today. And we bust each other's chops a lot. I was like, but I'll never forget. I was like, what do you want me to do, man? He's like, I want you to go out there and influence the area. I was like, what does that mean? He's like, don't let any VBIDs get to the polling place. I'm like, okay, how do I know a VBID? He's like, you'll know it when you see it. I'm like, because it's blowing up. Like, what? But we went out there in the middle of the night and dug in after, I should note, some Marine engineers went up there first and cleared it, because I want to say 6th platoon maybe, or 8th platoon of 1st Force had hit a mine on top of that hill before we got there. And I was like, I don't know why you put anything there, but okay, makes sense, I guess. It is the only high ground in the area. So we went up there and we just dug and we dug and we dug all night long, and we filled those sandbags, because as you can see, like that guy on the left is probably 6'3", and he's been digging all night, and that's as far as he's gotten, is knee deep. And so the sandbags were kind of giving us some extra protection. And man, the first day was pretty peaceful, because they were figuring out that we were there and what we were doing. And then the next few days, they were just mortaring us and rocketing us and trying to push us off that hill, I guess. Or maybe it was like, hey, great chance to kill some Americans, let's do it. But it was weird. Like, it's a high point of that deployment. I mean, it was dangerous and it was scary, and I really thought we would carry somebody off that hill dead, and we did not. I should note, nobody even got wounded, but not for lack of trying. So it was the only time I've been under, or I should say, it's the closest I ever came to sustained indirect fire, and that's a very relative term. But they would mortar and rocket us 2 or 3 times a day, and it was the first time I had ever watched mortar rounds walk in on me, like, and you're watching like walk across a desert, like in the movie, boom, 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 like, Got to sit here and take it, I guess. And he just got down in those little holes and tried to lay down. And I'll never forget one time because I had a vehicle parked right next to my hole, and my radio operator was sleeping in the hole. He'd been up all night long, and we're getting mortared. And I wake him up, and I'm like, "Wake up, wake up, wake up!" He's like, "What, sir? What?" And I'm like, "We're getting rocketed, man." And he goes, "Oh crap!" And he rolls back over and goes back to sleep. It was a wild experience up there.
God, the Marines and how comfortable, like at Quezon, it's unbelievable what guys can get comfortable with, shall I say?
Yeah, well, and let me be real clear. Whatever 3 or 4 days I spent sitting up on that hill, add it all together, it's not a late afternoon at Quezon. You know, like let me never make any comparison between that experience and what those guys did for 78 days at Quezon.
No, I don't think that'll ever be replicated again.
I hope not.
Oh gosh, here's another.
That's the same hill. That's
the same hill. Okay.
Yeah, that is that Sasser is, I think, at the forward edge of that hill, and that dude on the top picture is out the back of the hill. And you know, we were just like, watch for vehicle bombs going on that road there. And I never get this. We didn't see very many vehicles at all. And the insurgents did a great job of intimidating people and keeping them from voting. But this guy came driving by and he's honking at us, you know, and we like shoot a flare at him to stop him. And he slams on brakes and he holds his toddler out the window and he's like yelling at us. He goes, "We vote, we vote." And we're like, yeah, we're all screaming, clapping for him, like, "Go vote, man." And then he drives on and votes. But we sat. So, I mean, did we do our job? I guess we sat there. Nobody hit the polling place. We got in a number of firefights and or indirect firefights. The other platoon was way out to our east, and they did not have any contact whatsoever. So they were really annoyed because they were sitting there listening to us shooting it up. But anyway, that was that trip. It was cool. Like I got to be part of in a weird way, the first quote free Iraqi elections. And then years later, I was part of the first Afghan free elections. And I had a lot of hopes for Afghanistan that obviously didn't pan out, but it was still cool to be a part of it.
This is just crazy. I mean, you've got quite a few great.
Oh yeah, so that's my corpsman, who's a wonderful human being, taking a nap, and he's sitting up there, and that guy, he's still a good buddy of mine. He lives just a bit up the road from me. We surf together. The funny story from that was him and another cat. We were getting mortared, and they jumped in that tent. And the funniest thing, like rockets are flying in, mortars, whatever it was, and they're both like, we got incoming. And I this is a long story. I was standing on the forward edge of that hill talking to those two guys, and we're just whatever we were talking about. And I look out at that village that's in that top shot between us and that explosion, and I saw something flare up like fire. And I was like, I remember saying, I couldn't say it loud. Like my voice was kind of arrested. I was like, "Incoming." And they both look at me like, "What'd you say?" "Incoming." They're like, "What, sir?" And finally I was like, "Incoming." And so we all run and we're jumping in our holes, and this rocket's flying straight at us. It's 107 millimeter. And those dudes jumped in that tent and zipped the door behind them. And they said they were sitting in that tent looking at each other like, I guess we're good now. I don't know. But it's the funny stuff that you do when you got nothing else to do.
God, I'm so glad you took these photos and are such a writer.
I forget about them now, man. That GBU explosion, or that's a JDAM actually. And we were sitting there and I was just listening to the radio, and a Cobra and Huey went flying past. So that big brown patch at the kind of the top at the skyline there where the explosion is, like that long brown line in the photo where the explosion is dead center. That was called the shelf. And it was like it was a heights. It went up this big cliff area. And a Huey and a Cobra were flying below the level of that cliff top. And some dude comes out of a cave and whips an RPG at him.
Oh.
So this, Cobra's like, turns around and goes back and shoots a rocket or machine gun or whatever he shot at him. And they're like, okay, I guess that put paid to that. Dude comes back out of the cave, shoots an RPG at him again. So they're like real serious now. So they come back, they shoot at it again. He comes back, whips another rocket at him. I mean, like he's not having it. And finally, I remember saying, like, I heard it over the radio, heard what was coming. I said to all the guys, like, anybody want to watch him drop a JDAM? And everybody's like, yeah. And we all sat on the forward edge of that hill like we were at a concert and watched that bomb go in and bury that cave. But honestly, hats off to that dude. I'm glad no Marines were hurt in the making of this picture. But I also got massive respect for a guy who was like, I
mean, the RPG to a Cobra. I mean,
right. I mean, was he even going to get close? I don't know, but that was the deal.
Holy cow! I've got some of those other photos as well. Let me see. I think there was. Oh yeah, there were two more. I was curious about what your non-line here is.
Yeah, so you wrote that on the window shield and then put a piece of contact paper over it so it wouldn't get wiped off, because if you're calling in a 9-line medevac under pressure while you're stressed, like you need something to go through and be able to work as your SOP. And so I don't want to think about it from memory. I can just say, here's the grid location of the pickup. My call sign is Dagger 8, and then I can describe the patients and, hey, you're going to need to bring a basket in to get this guy, or hey, whatever. And you just list it all out so that the guys coming to do the medevac know what they need and they bring the right gear and they're prepared, for the environment into which they're entering. It's just ways to make sure you don't screw it up when you're scared and under pressure and freaked out. And like, I wish I had a recording of me after my first firefight, like calling it in, because I'm just like, all over the place, fired up, mad, angry, scared, the whole nine. And it's funny, there's a guy named Jeff Wilson, was our operations chief, Master Gunnery Sergeant Jeff Wilson. And I worked with him for years. He retired and became a civilian at MARSOC. And I tell this story all the time, told his retirement. But first time I ever got shot at was in an ambush. And I was like, called Jeff, who was on the watch floor. I was like, this is Dagger 8, we got shot. I'm going to go back. We're going to go. I probably wasn't making a lot of sense. And Jeff he's rough anyway, but he's like, hey, Dagger 8, I just need to know, are you going to go execute the raid we sent you to do or not? And I was like, Dad, you're punking me out. I just got shot at. You're punking me out, which is exactly what needed to happen. Because I was like, now I'm mad at Jeff. And now I'm like, yeah, we're going to go do the raid. And so, we go on and we execute our mission. And it got us out of the firefight. And later I had one of my combat experienced Marines come to me. He's like, hey, sir, I just want to let you know, like, that's the best decision you could have made, was to press on with the mission. And I was like, and that kind of became my thing. And later that same Marine told me one time, he's like, man, sometimes I'm afraid you're going to, get one of us hurt because you don't know how to say no. Wow. That's something to think about too. But I very much had a mentality of, execute the bump plan. Let's go. Reload. We got a vehicle down. Fine. Leave it on the side of the road. Reload. Let's go. It just was getting the job done was kind of my focus.
Man, oh man. I'm gonna save. There's a few other photos with some stories I'll save as I've already held you way past our time here. That's why I said we're gonna have to do a part 2. Okay. We had gotten through the 10th group has left, and y'all are continuing working. We just went over some of the instances there. There are a few others. Now, is this where you go back full on active duty and join into the
This
MARSOC
is
organization?
where I started that process without knowing it. I got home from Iraq in, March, April of 2005. I had a year of law school left. I was already slated to be a prosecutor in Tallahassee for a semester. And that was going to be my law school thing to do, was go work in the prosecutor's office. So I showed up there. I actually went to dive school on the backside of that deployment. So I was like 15 pounds overweight and exhausted. And I showed up to combat dive school. And I knew I was friendly with the guy who was the staff in COIC there, a guy named Master Sergeant Greg Miller, who I also think retired as a master guns. But I went to Greg and I was like, Greg, like, how much hazing am I looking at here? He's like, absolutely none. There will be no hazing here whatsoever. This course is hard enough that I don't need to haze you. I was like, okay, great. This is going to work out well for a guy who's been drinking nothing but Fanta Orange and eating ramen for 7 months. So I did dive school, went back to law school, I did that felony thing, and was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, and looked at a couple of different options. And the Marine Corps sent out a message to reserve officers and said, any of y'all consider coming back? We need you. We got 2 wars going on. So I talked to my wife and I dropped papers, and they selected, I think, 4 of us to return to active duty. And I told them I will only return to active duty as an infantry officer. I've been in all infantry assignments within the reconnaissance world. I have not done any intelligence stuff since 1998. It's 2006 now. So if you'll bring me back in as an 0302, cool. And they did. And I think I was the only one selected, for the MOS that I wanted to go back in as, which there probably weren't that many guys saying I'll only do this if you'll send me places to get shot at. But I went back in and I stayed at MARSOC or JSOC or the SOCOM headquarters for the next 16 years.
Dang.
And it just kind of bounced around those spots. And as I've said multiple times this morning, there were goods and there were bads to all of that. And we can talk about that some other time. But
yeah.
I got to, do a lot of what I wanted to do in my life and work with some really neat people and have some experiences I really wanted to have. I also missed out on some stuff I wish I could have done. And that was entirely as a result of decisions that I made. So immature First Lieutenant Parker couldn't have said that, but old, long in the tooth Lieutenant Colonel Parker can certainly say that. And so like I say, we could talk about that some other time.
Absolutely. Do you have enough time to answer a few questions for pictures? Then I'll let you go when we get part 2 set up. Because I know I've had you wait too long here. There was a great photo of, and of course I'll save these other photos because you've got a lot of great team photos that I want to show off. But there's 2 or 3 in particular I wanted to show off to guys and get one particular to get a story behind. Did you get to meet President Obama?
I did. I just wrote about that the other day, probably for the first time. I always refused to go to those things, whether it was USO, some comedian or some news personality or whatever. Like I was like, look, I'm here to fight, whatever that means. It may just mean, I'm being a staff guy supporting the guys that are actually doing the fighting, but whatever. It may be even more so if I'm a staff guy, I'm not going to go
spend time meeting and greeting.
But that deployment, I was the J5, so the Plans, Policy, and Partnerships Officer for Combined Joint Special Operations Task Force Afghanistan. And we were waiting that whole deployment to hear from the Obama White House what the stay behind numbers were going to be in Afghanistan. So this was 2013, 2014, and we thought we were going to have pulled out, in a way that didn't happen for another 7 years. And there were various plans related to numbers that if we leave this number of people behind, we can do X, Y, and Z in these places. If we leave that number, it's A, B, and C in those places. And so they kept telling us like, oh, hey, there's somebody important coming to make an announcement. And it was like, is it the Secretary of Defense? Who's it coming? And then it was pretty clear it was probably going to be the president. And I finally was like, you know what? Let's go down there. So I loaded up I took all my dudes, and we rolled down and stood in line for a long time. And then I and that SEAL to my left got grabbed because they saw our camis, and they were like, those look different than all these Army camis. So they made us stand on the bleachers behind President Obama while he was talking. And it was whatever. It was interesting. Anytime you get to meet and shake hands with the president, it's something. And he said, I'm going to talk to anybody who wants to talk to me, and I bet he shook hands with 4,000 service members that night. And he was like in a corral, like they put up those metal fences they put up concerts and stuff.
Yeah.
They had him inside it with the Secret Service dudes facing out, and then all of us around. And he worked that circle, shaking every hand, for hours. But yeah, I got to shake hands with President Obama, and he talked to a couple of our guys. It was right on.
That's awesome. You may not agree with people's politics and all that, and I don't like any politicians. I learned from my dad, God rest his soul, a Vietnam veteran, that you don't trust politicians of any sort. But if the president of the United States, while you're an operator, a soldier, or whatever, you go meet the president. I don't know if it's Donald Trump, if it's Bush, if it's Obama, if it's Biden. That's a special thing. This is what we as Americans vote.
Flies to Afghanistan, and they brought whoever the country guy is that does those.
Toby Keith, Kid Rock.
No, he does the insurance commercials with the football player.
I know you're talking about, not big and rich, but
he's got a big hat.
Yeah,
all of them, but he's got a really big hat. Nice guy, whatever. He came out, he played a little concert for us. Some other politician talked, probably some general talked, and then here came the president of the United States of America. And I'm standing 20 feet behind him for that. And I'm less and less enamored of any kind of celebrity the older I get. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean I'm just not interested. Like, whatever.
They're just normal people.
Yeah, you're a person. Good job. But still, standing behind the president was kind of cool. There was some that sucked too, because this political flack type with the clipboard and the headset came out, and she's like, you're going to be on national TV all over the world. Don't pick your nose. And I was like, honey, I'm 40 something years old. I got a kid at home. I got a wife at home. I've been on TV a few times. I've done a few of these things.
I know not to scratch my balls and
not a savage. I really just wanted to pick my nose, like roll it up and flick it at her, but whatever. It was, and that was the second time I'd seen Obama speak. He came to Lejeune once, and it was the kind of thing where it was like, the following 6 people will go and hear the president speak. So we walk all over to the gym on base, and we listen to that announcement. Whatever. It was never my thing, regardless of the politics of the person on the podium.
Absolutely. And like I said, I've got one photo left, and we've got questions, guys. If y'all got questions, we'll do that on part 2, because
if they got questions now.
No. I mean, there are some on here, but I've got a list, so we'd be on here another hour. Right. And I'll save them for part 2. But we mentioned, and I've got a lot of your teammate photos that I'd like to show and get guys that you knew that have passed on, that we spoke offline. But could you mention, since you actually knew the legendary Digger Dell, this is 2 SOG men that are with him in Thailand for the 46th Company, and Digger was Force Recon, CIA, and God knows what else. But could you tell us a little bit about your interaction with the legendary Digger Odell?
Yeah. Years ago, I was doing a retirement present for a friend of mine, and Pete Petronzio, who was the CO of 2nd Force, and then he was the commander of the Foreign Military Training Unit that became the Marine Special Ops Advisor Group, and then he was the G3 of MARSOC, on and on, retired from commanding the 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit. But Pete was a real good friend of mine. So I got pictures of all kind of Marine special operators, going all the way back to the OSS and the Paramarines and the Raiders and Force Recon and like famous folk. And I got him to autograph them, and I framed them all. And I was like, here's the lineage of this thing. Cause he was one of the originals building MARSOC.
Oh yeah.
And I found Digger's email address on the FRA website, and I just cold emailed him and was like, hey, Lieutenant Colonel Odell, would you be, that's Terry Graves that your cursor is on, and that's Digger. And Digger wrote Graves's Medal of Honor citation. And I lived in Graves Hall when I was at Quantico, but he was super kind. He's like, yeah, just mail it to me and I'll sign it and send it back to you. I think he was a little like, why the hell would you want my autograph? But we stayed in touch, and we started talking pretty regularly, and we become friends. I brought him to MARSOC to give a couple classes on his time in Laos and the Battle of Skyline Ridge. And I've been out to California, and we always try. There's another guy out there who's a prior SEAL. Digger's really good friends with the SEALs out there. Because he had a really neat career. And like me, at broken time, he left the Marine Corps post-Vietnam, or getting home from Vietnam, and he went to work at Special Activities and went over and fought in Laos for, I think, 3 years, and then did some other CIA stuff. But when Vietnam collapsed as a U.S. effort, Digger went back in the Marine Corps. And he is, as you see there, he's a Commando Hall of Honor member. He was a plank owner at JSOC. He's the guy who wrote the hostage rescue manual and plan for the Marine Corps when we used to do IHR training, and he was the first Recon battalion commander. He's just done a ton of stuff, and he retired as the chief of staff at Naval Special Warfare Command, which, as far as I know, he's the only Marine I know that served at that level of staff there at Warcom. And so he's really tight with those Southern California SEALs of a certain age. But so there's a guy named Daniel Stewart who is a great American SEAL and mutual buddy of mine and Digger's. I was in Afghanistan with Daniel, and he was big buddies with Admiral McCraven. So McCraven brought Stewart as a civilian to be kind of his advisor. And I would always go have lunch with him when we were in Afghanistan together, and just kind of sit there and talk to this guy who was kind enough to act like we were peers, even though he had, 15 or 20 years of experience on me. And then we found out we're both big buddies and love and appreciate and admire Digger. So anyway, that's how I know Digger. And I try to talk to him, if I can, once a month. It's just kind of,
he is a literal living legend. You got the Billy Waws, the Dick Meadows. Well, he's not around. The Bucky Burrises. You did have the Eldon Bargewells. Digger Odell is the absolute living embodiment of a living legend. His name deserves to be mentioned up there with all those others. I mean,
he knows all those cats, and he's a lot of fun to talk to for a million reasons. But from the history perspective, especially early '80s stuff is really interesting to talk to him about. He's just, but like all of us, he's getting on in years, and he's got obligations in that regard. He's very private.
Oh God, I've tried numerous times to get in touch with him, and he was nice and said no, not at this time. And then another time he reached out but didn't respond. I'm going to try and see if I can get with him again. But oh yeah, these guys are not saying guys that come on and talk aren't quiet professionals, but he is the epitome of a quiet professional.
He is somebody who we are real life friends, and have a great deal of affection for one another, and make an effort to be around one another when we can. And he knows I'm a full-time writer now, and I've been like, Digger, what do you think, man? Let me write something about it. No. He just not interested.
Mm-hmm. Not at all. It's amazing. It is amazing. And I'm going to keep trying. Even if he doesn't come on here, I'd love to just speak to him and categorize some stuff. But
go like he can't now. He just can't travel because of other
obligations. Oh, yeah.
But he is somebody like, again, hey, Digger, would you come talk to a room full of Marine captain special operations officers? Yes. We'll do that in a heartbeat. but he has zero interest in this kind of thing.
Oh yeah, no, same as him and as Captain Fred Vogel, another legend in the Marine Corps and CIA. Actually, he was in SOG also. I'm working on him, but he's another one. I doubt he'll. He's spoken in email, but he doesn't talk on the phone nor on emails or on these. So yeah. I'm trying. I'm working, but we'll see what we can do. But as I said, held you way too long. Not going to keep beating a dead horse here. We will do a part 2 if you're open to it, because we still have some stuff.
You surprised me with some stuff.
I was about to say, we've still got some stuff I've got to cover, and I know some people are going to have some great questions. So whenever you get time this month or next month or whenever you're a busy guy, would love to have you back on for a part 2.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Let's do it.
Excellent. All righty, guys. Well, I'm super glad we got to start the morning off like we did, and get your questions in. I'll let you know as soon as we get this scheduled and get it out and about. Colonel, is there anything else you'd like to close out with before we shut down for the day?
Not really, other than just say, understand, everybody that you talk to is just regular people. They just got to do some irregular and maybe in some cases extraordinary things. But I mean, nothing I've said today has been self-deprecating. I'm a short, chubby dude who wanted to do a certain thing, and through grace and the generosity of others, I got to do some of it, and it was really cool. And now I'm on to other things, and I think that's important to recognize too, is that there's a whole lot of other stuff out there in the world.
Books, I've got to get your book. I'm going to be linking your Instagram and your Facebook in case people would like to follow you. Great stories on both, and I'll put your Amazon link on there to where they can order the book, much like myself. I'll probably do that as soon as we get done, and we'll start staying in touch and seeing about setting up a part 2 then.
All right, bud, I appreciate you.
Absolutely. I can't thank you enough, and also can't thank you enough for bearing with me this morning and the dogs and all of that. So
got two right here.
I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will stay in touch and we'll get something set up.
All right, man. Appreciate you.
See you later. Bye-bye.